get started.
Okay. And we're ready.
Okay. Make sure I close anything. I will close this. All right, so hopefully, can you see my screen, Celeste? Great, okay, awesome. Okay, so we are kind of picking up where we left off last session 2 weeks ago with a session on basically connecting a database to a web page. So last session, we loaded a web page that we served from our very own web server. And we had that web page make a request to that web server for some data. And so what we didn't get to was actually connecting that web server to our database. And once we do that, we'll be able to read data from the database and send it to our web page. So that's what we're going to try to achieve today. Now, I've already set up a mock of all of this working successfully, and it's on this web URL. So if you go to, I think the best place probably, or the easiest URL to read here is this github.com/Page Swanson /library SQL. So if you just want to access this site starting off, and you can follow along with today's lesson by going to lessons, and then this is session 6. So it's July 29th. And I always like to start off the sessions by just quickly reintroducing myself for anyone new. So my name is Page Swanson. I'm a professional software engineer, and I coordinate this program with the library. They're kind enough to let me do this series on different software technologies, web technologies, hopefully giving the opportunity for everyone in attendance to learn something new about programming. I have office hours every Monday. So every Monday, whether or not we have a session, from 6:30 to 8:30. And you can sign up using this link. I put the link in every single session note. So please sign up for those. You can talk to me about anything programming related, not just the topics for this session. And then you can email me at this address here, and I can answer any questions that you might have about programming in general. And I'll try to get back to you pretty promptly. And then Celeste here also, I think if you want to introduce yourself, just.
Yeah, thank you. For 1 second, I was like, oh, he forgot to introduce himself. I'm Celeste. I work in Ives Square at the New Haven Free Public Library. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm in helping Page for quite a long time right now, like a couple months already. And I'm going to be kind of in the background and watching the chat and the Facebook Live as well. So if you guys have any questions, please just put them in the chat. We're going to be answering them as we can. And again, thank you for being here tonight. And today is the last session of the database, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So anyways, regarding everything, remember that we have the office hours. Our Page has the office hours every Monday, 6:30 to 8:30. If it's something that you guys couldn't resolve, he has his office hours. And then in August, we're going to be doing something different. We're going to doing a coding challenge. And if you want to Page briefly say what it's about, and then it's going to be in person and virtually as well. So people can come into the library.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to kind of introduce that. But the gist is that, if you're happen to be interviewing or you're getting started in professional coding, or you're interested in professional coding, one of the kind of like daunting parts about getting a job coding, or really just a useful skill that you kind of develop having coded for a long time, is basically problem solving using programming. So programming allows you to solve problems like in an abstract way. And so I'm kind of interested in hosting a series of sessions, just one or two, I think, at this point, kind of demonstrating what that's like and walking through the process of introducing a problem, breaking down the problem, kind of what the problem involves, and then trying to write code to solve that problem. So that's something that you have to do very commonly in software engineering and software development. But it's also something that comes up a lot when you get started. So yeah, those will kind of be the content of those sessions.
So just to let everyone know, so those sessions are going to be August 12th and August 26th, the same time, 6:30 to 7:30, and they're going to be held here at the library in Ives Square, and remotely as well. So now that we finished with the housekeeping things, we can start.
Yeah, right. Okay, great. So yeah, so we're going to be kind of resuming from where we left off, but you know, so it would certainly be helpful if you wanted to read through the session notes from last session, session 5. That being said, you can jump right in because all of the files you need are located in this project. So just a quick overview, if you go to this library SQL link here, you'll see a directory called serving. Okay, so in this directory, that's everything we need for our database web server. So if you click in here, I'm going to reference a couple of these files, SQLite DB or SQLite DB, which we'll talk about generating again as like a review, and then webserver.ts. So this is the script code that we need to use for our web server. Yeah, you'll want to go download this file, and then public in here we have an index.html file. So if you want to follow along directly, I would just download this directory, this serving directory with all of these files. Let me see. You should be able to do that. Well, I don't want to delete it. Let's see. I'm pretty sure you can just download it. I mean, yeah, if you can't download the directory by itself, you could download the files individually. Of course, that's kind of a pain. So what you could just do is download the zip. That's probably the fastest way. And then if you download the zip, you can go open that up and then open up specifically this serving folder. But we'll kind of get right to it, assuming you got that set up. So we're going to be covering reading from an SQLite file, which represents like our database, which we're going to set up again really quickly here. And then we're going to transmit the data from that database as a response to a request that we make from a web page. So we're going to load up a web page. The web page is going to ask our web server for some data from the database. We'll read the data from the database and then send it back to our web page. This is a very conventional task that you need to do for almost any web page where you want the user of that page to be able to recall data that you stored. So this is a really common task, and we're kind of getting to the end here of that complete end-to-end sort of style of technology. So recapping kind of like creating the database, we've done it in previous sessions, but I wanted to kind of show how we pull all of that together very quickly, because we're going to need that database file for this part of the session. We created a database script previously in the previous sessions when we were learning about how to use SQL or SQL to write SQL scripts and to create data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this and just demonstrate what's inside. It's just a data script that allows us to basically stand up a table inside of a database and add data to it. So I'm going to copy the content of this. Oops, not all of that. I'm just going to drag and copy this. And I'm going to close this out. And what we're going to do is use this link here, which I already had it open. I'll just close it. I'm just opening this in a new tab. And what we're going to do really quickly to run SQL scripts in the web browser. So it's a very nifty tool.
Page,
what I'm going to do. Oh, yeah.
yeah, would
Sorry?
you mind to repeat that because you froze for a couple seconds?
Oh, sorry about that.
It was like 3 seconds. But...
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so I'm just taking the content of this SQL script here, and I'm pasting it into this online web browser editor. This editor just basically lets me run SQL scripts in the browser. So it's very useful. So when we run this, it's going to create a table that's part of the script, and then it's going to add the data using SQL to this table, which we can see on the left-hand side. So if I use some of the SQL that we've learned in previous sessions, I can query this table. I can ask the table basically to give me all of the data inside, and it gives me, it spits out a handful of rows here that we've already added to the table with that script I pasted. So that's great. The table looks good. What we can do now is actually save the file onto our computer using the dropdown at the top left. So I say File, Save DB. It's going to prompt me to save it as a SQL or SQLite.db file. You can go ahead and save that. I've already saved it to this repository. So that's part of this repository. If you take a look again at the serving directory, so you'll see this SQLite DB file. So that's good to go. You can check it out in there. Otherwise, you can download it again for yourself. And we can move on. So this will be the data source for our website. So what we need to do next is actually read the data from the database using our web server. So there's a couple of handy ways to do this. You can use this link here, which I think is actually, I was reading earlier, it's actually broken, unfortunately, this page. I have like a saved copy of it. So as long as I don't navigate away from this tab, I'll still be able to demonstrate the documentation to you. But it's not the end of the world because this person's GitHub page is still up. It's just that the website that they built for this particular technology, unfortunately, they broke it. I don't know why that happened. I mean, I could see why, actually. We can see what change they made to actually break the web page, but unfortunately, it is down. That being said, still, a lot of their examples are still available here. Their basic example is available here on the web page for just their GitHub page. So we can kind of take a look here. But if you try to go to the documentation page right now, unfortunately, it's down, and that's kind of an unforeseen event. But nonetheless, we can kind of take a look at this and get an idea of what we'll have to do for reading from the database in our web server code. So first things first, let's go ahead and open up the webserver.ts file that I'm referring to here. So let me just take the chat there. So what I've done is, let's make this a little bit simpler. So I'm using a text editor called Atom. I've used it multiple times before. It's a really easy to use text editor. You can just search Atom text editor and you can find out information about it. And I'm actually just going to quickly add the folder that we're working with, that serving folder. That way you can see everything that I'm working with here. So like I mentioned in the lesson, I'm going to open this webserver.ts file. And what I want to do first and foremost is basically open up the SQLite DB file at the beginning of my web server. So my web server is basically hosting all of the content from my web page. And it is, going to respond to requests that I make from that page. So what I want to do first and foremost is actually, open it up, open up that database file. And in order to do that, I need to import the library that I'm referencing here. So This is an open source library. It's available to everyone. You can view all of the code that the library provides by going to this URL. And what you need to do in order to use it is import the module from this URL. So that's what we're doing with this, this particular line of code. And then we're opening the database file like at the beginning of the web server. So we're going to copy that. And actually, I'm already, oh, excuse me, let me go back to the text editor. So I've already added all of the code that I'm covering in this guide for you. So you can just follow along as I kind of like address each point in the code. So our web server will be ready to go to serve this content. But yeah, just so you know, all of this code is already there. You can just kind of follow along with the additions that I'm making. So yeah, we're importing this module, and then we're going to open the database file using the module that we just imported. So it's making a new database, like object, you could call it, using this TypeScript web server code. And we're reading from SQLite.db. What we need to be able to do is actually save this file and then run the web server. So if you were to get an error with this, like maybe it says it can't find your file, just make sure the file is next to the web server.ts file. Or if you want to put it somewhere else, what you need to do is navigate to it, so to speak. So like if I were to make a new folder here, call it like, and I put it in here. Okay, and I'll close this. We won't be able to read the SQLite file inside of the text editor because it won't make any sense to our text editor. It's not going to really be very legible. But that's okay because we are going to read the database with our web server. So if I like move this to another directory here, what I need to do then is reference that directory. And using the command from the previous session for running our web server, it's this command right here. And in fact, if you want to follow along and run that command yourself, I think I include it at the bottom. But if not, you can take a look at the previous lesson and just grab that command. I'll show you where to get it. So if we go to session 5 and we go all the way down, we can grab this command here. Okay, I'm going to close that. Go. Oops. And just for reference, I'll make sure to update this document with that command too, so you don't have to hop back and forth. But I'm going to paste this command in and run it just like this. And the reason I wanted this error to kind of trigger is because it's going to tell us that we actually need to be able to write to the database file when we open it. So when we're reading from this database, although it appears that all we need to do is read, because all we're going to do is get data from the database. So like I'm opening a database file, I'm reading data from it using SQL. In actuality, what we need to do is also occasionally write to the database. This has to do with a number of things, but one of the primary concerns with this is like certain permissions need to be established, I guess, when you read from a database. Certain like user options need to be established, connection options or connection like logs. So basically, when you open a database file, especially like a SQLite database file using this library, this SQLite library, you do need to have write permissions enabled for your web server. So I'm using Dino as the web service runtime. So in order to do that with Dino, what we need to do is say, not only allow read, but allow write. I'm gonna update that there. Okay, so once we've done that, we should be able to run our web server now successfully. And there's no errors you can see like we got last time. Everything looks good. It's able to run the web server. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel it. And the way I do that is I just press Control-C. So just the Control key and then C, and that will cancel. So like as if you're going to copy something. But in the command line, what that will do is basically stop the web server from running. Yeah, so now we're successfully opening our database file. That's working. So let's go back to the lesson kind of dialogue and see what we want to do next. So the goal of all of this is to open the database file and then build a particular request handler for our web page so that if we make a request for data from the database, we can respond to it with our web server and read data from the database. So we're going to make a custom request handler. And actually what we're doing is modifying the one we made in the last session. So we're going to jump down here to the next part of the code. And I'll kind of review really briefly kind of like what, or kind of refresh our memory on like what the rest of this code is doing. Basically what we're doing is we're trying to set up an HTTP web server here. So what we're doing is we're setting up the server connection, and we're defining it as an HTTP connection on port 8080. So this is just web server stuff. And then this is the real meat of what we're doing here with our web server, which is basically listening on that HTTP connection for requests. And those requests are going to come from our web page. And then what we're doing here with these if statements, these would be called if statements, is we're handling specific like requests that are being made from the web page. And each of those requests are given to us with a particular URL. So if the URL of the request matches this variable URL, which I defined up here as const URL. So the URL is basically the local host, which we can run here. I actually have it up. You can close this. I just have mine called my test page. Now it's not going to work because I stopped the server. So let's run that server again. Okay, we're running. I'm going to refresh the page. And I actually got an error here, but we'll resolve that in a second. So if we go to localhost 8080, so that's the URL that you see right here. If we visit that, we should see the page using the existing webserver.ts code. And that's what we're responding to with this part of the code. So we're responding to requests from this page. That's actually why we got this error. So we got this error because we couldn't find the table bottle info, which sometimes this kind of thing happens. I'm actually not sure why I couldn't find that table. Maybe it doesn't like that I did this. Let's put it back. Yeah, let's replace it. And let's just go back to the way things were. And let's, oh, I see. So what happened was when I had moved to that file, I didn't change the location for the database. Let me just repeat that because that's kind of interesting. So the database, the web server actually stopped when it ran into that error, which you'll see happens. So if you run your web server and you reach an error, it'll terminate the web server and you'll have to start it over again. So my page can no longer make requests to that web server. So the error was that it tried to open this file, but I had moved it. So I'd like made this new folder called database. Oh, it already exists. That's okay. Yeah, so I had made this new folder. And then I moved the database to that folder. So great, all is well. But the problem was that when I make the database object in this web server file, I didn't adjust this string here to point to this new folder. So really what I need to say is database SQLite DB, but I didn't do that. So what happens is when I run my web server, it actually is going to make a database file that matches this location. Since it didn't find one, it'll say, okay, I didn't find it. Well, I'll make one called SQLite DB. And this just has nothing in it. This is just a blank database. So we don't want this. We want to delete this. And what we want to do instead is point it to the correct location. So since we moved it into this folder, I'm going to point the database object at this DB location. So that's just a word of advice. If you get this error and it looks like this, so no such table, maybe you are pointing to the incorrect location for your .db file, and you need to go find where you downloaded it and point it to that location, or just move it next to the web server.ts script. That's probably the easiest way. So now if we run the server again, it sees that we made a change, and we can reload, and we don't get any errors. We're printing some stuff that we'll kind of dig into in just a second here. So going back to the lesson notes, I know I'm jumping all over the place. Really sorry about that. Hopefully you can keep up. So basically, we're just following this example that's kind of like provided here. We're basically importing the library. We're opening the database, and then what we're doing is we're not doing a query to like make a table. We don't want to make a table. We don't want to insert into the table yet. All we want to do is select from the table and return that to our page. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to make a request response. We're going to add a response to a particular request in our code. And then we're going to send the data from the database via that response. So jumping back to our web server here, we're going to jump down to where we handle request events. So for each request event that we get or that we pick up on our HTTP connection, we want to do something about it. So this first request event is just the most basic request event. That's what happens when we reload this page. So if I go to localhost 8080, if I just load this page, that's the most basic request event. And that request event is being handled right here with this code. And it's just giving the requester the content of this HTML file. You can see it inside of public index.html. That's like this web page that you're seeing right here. Okay, so that's the most basic request. What we want to do is add a new request handler, which we did in the last session. We actually added this code in the last session. But what we want to do now is we want to respond instead with the database code that you see here, or the database content using the code that you see here. So we're going to hop down to this section. So if you're following along, you can hop down to this specific request handler. And what I decided to do was, I said, basically, if you get a request URL that's got localhost 8080, but instead it has a request for /API/data. So I just called it that. You can call it whatever you want. If I reload this page, you'll see the request I'm making. So if we go to headers, you can see I'm making a request for API data. And the way I'm doing that is inside of the HTML file. And we kind of broke this all down last session, so you can look at the notes there and see how we arrived here. But basically, I just put this URL in directly, and I said, okay, can you fetch that URL and tell me what the response is? So that's all I needed to do to get to this point. So now I need to come up with a way to handle that request and actually give the data that is being requested. So we can break down this problem even further. So how do I basically begin querying from the database file? How do I build the data that I get into something that we can send to the web page? And then how do I actually send it to the web page? So the first thing we need to do is determine how the data should look. So I kept it very simple. And what I said was, I want an array of strings. An array is basically like a list in TypeScript or JavaScript. So in TypeScript, unlike JavaScript, which has a little bit of a distinction that I won't get too deep into, because really we just want to read this data from the database. But in JavaScript, you might see just this code. But in TypeScript, what we have to do is we have to say what kind of data we expect to be inside of this list. And a list of strings really is just something that looks like this. So I'll make a comment. These are all comments, by the way. They don't actually execute like part of our code. So like if we put errors in here, it's totally okay. A list kind of is going to look like this. So edit this. It doesn't really want to. That's okay. Basically, it's a special type of structure that contains data that's like enumerated, or it's like one after the other, right? So a list of strings might look like this. So I'm going to represent a string with quotes around it. That's just a string of characters. So it'd be like something here, something else. So this is the kind of data that we're going to be sending to the web page. So we're going to read the data from the database and build a structure that looks like this. And then we're going to send that to the web page. So that's like the first thing we need to do. So if we go back to the lesson, kind of following along. So we're right here. So we're going to define the type of data that we want to respond with. And then the next thing we're going to do is actually start the query. So we're going to jump down to this code here. And I'll just make a note here. So the data we want. Oh, how about this? So this that we just defined looks like this. You can kind of imagine like a list of items. Okay. So now we actually want to query the content of our database. Remember, we opened the database up here with this code. So we said constant db equals new database object. And it's at this SQLite.db file. So what we're going to do is actually query the db with the following query. So query is basically a method or like a function or a task that is specific to this database object that we're working with. And basically what we're doing here is we're saying, I would like you to perform a query on this object. And here is the query that I'd like you to perform. And we're going to use our SQL knowledge, which we've kind of accumulated over this series, this database series. And if you want to take a look back at some of the previous lessons to see all the types of queries we've been working with so far, but this is just a simple select query. So a select query is what we use to retrieve data from a table in a database. So the idea here is to build this select query with all of the individual columns or properties of data that we want from the table bottle info. Now, if you remember, we just made this table. We used that automated script that I had saved. And we made this table, and we can kind of see that this query is going to work, or see what this query is going to, like what kind of data it's going to return if we run it. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it into my handy web SQL kind of like engine, and I'm going to run it. And when I run it, you can see exactly the kind of data that we get back. So we get the color, we get the material, get the volume, and we get the manufacturer like location. All things that we defined on this table. But notice, remember that when we do these select statements, we get our data parsed out in row, like row, we get it row by row, which kind of makes you think of sort of a list. So you can think of this as a list, kind of like the one I was describing before. So this isn't too different from this list here, right? This is a list of strings, so it's, or an array. So an array of strings, okay? So really here, what we're getting back from this query is an array of like rows. So each of these is a row of data. I'm getting a list of rows back when we do this query. So that's why we're wrapping this query in a for statement. So this for statement is basically going to say, for each of the items that you are kind of working through, that you got back from this query. I know that's like kind of a lot to unpack, but really you can read this a little bit plainly if you kind of break it down. So basically, I made a comment here to kind of help clarify some of this, but you can read this as for every row, and each row looks like this, right? It has color, material, volume, manufactured where. So same, it has to line up with this query property list here. So for each row, this would be one row of the results that we get back from this query. Do the following. Now the following is going to come inside of these braces. So everything that we're like defining as part of our request for data from this database, that's going to be inside these parentheses. So you can see the parentheses here. Everything that we want to do for each of the rows we get back, that's going to be inside of the braces. Okay, so first thing that we're doing, or that we've decided to do, is I'm actually going to log the information that we get back. You actually don't need these as lines here, but I'm using them to kind of clarify the type of data that I expect from the database file. So for color, I expect a string. For material, I also expect a string, so just a string of characters. So I expect a string, and then for volume, I expect a number, and then for manufacturer location, I expect a string again. So I have number and then string. So I'm logging that to the console with this line. So for every row, I'm going to make an entry in the console, which I'll be able to see here, which now kind of answers the mystery of where this kind of content was coming from. So that's where this content was coming from. Every time we make a request to our web server that matches this URL, it's going to run through this code. Okay, it's going to add to the console this line, you requested data. So we can actually use these console.logs to track where we are in our request. And then for every single row that we get back from the database, it's going to log the color, the material, the volume, and the manufacturer location. So that's what it's doing here. So it's doing it one per row. And if you notice here from our online IDE or our editor, you can see that we have 4 entries total, 4 rows. And we're getting 4 console entries back. So that all lines up, which kind of brings us to the next part. If we go back to their notes, just want to clarify where I am. So I'm still here. I've started a query, and now I'm handling the results of the query. So this next part is a little bit complicated looking, but it's not too bad either. So what we're doing is, now that we've got the results of our query happening in front of us, what we're doing is now handling each row, and we're going to try to populate this data that we want to send to the web page. So the web page is requesting data from us. We want to basically put that data together in a nice, usable way and send it back to the person that requested it. So that's what we're doing here. You can read the following as, I'll kind of do a similar example to what we have here. So I'll make another comment to read this as, so push to the data object a long string containing the properties of the row. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. So what we're doing is we're saying, for every row that we get back from the database, add an item to the data object, which is what we're sending to the web page. And what I want you to add is a string, which is this. So this is the string we're going to add, because remember, this needs to be a list of strings or an array of strings, a list or an array. And we're going to make our own custom string, which contains all of the data from that row. So what we're doing here is we're basically making a row, or a string, sorry, a string of characters that consists of the name of the property and then the value of the property itself. So in JavaScript or TypeScript, what you can do is you can use this $ and then brace, and you can reference a variable or a value that you've defined above. So we defined color above as we were pulling it out of the database row. So each row consists of color, material, volume, and manufactured where. These are variables. And we're referencing them to build a string, which we're going to add to the data object to send to the web page. So that's all I'm doing here. I'm making one big long string. And what I can do actually is to make this very obvious. So I'll show you how data changes over time by logging data, the object, to the console. So let's see what it looks like. And what we'll need to do actually is, since we made a change to the web server code, we have to stop the web server and we're going to restart it. So I'll restart it here. So everything looks good. The code looks good. We can now revisit the web page and we'll request it again. So I've made my request. So we should be able to look to the console and see the updates we made. So take a look here, and hopefully this clarifies, kind of brings everything into the big picture. So also, I realize that it's probably really, really small. I really apologize for that. For anyone with poor eyesight like myself. So we can see what's happening here every time we look at a new row of data. So we print, whoa, don't do that. So we print a single row of data as a string. That's what we're doing here. And that's what we're seeing right here. And then we're adding it to this data object, which we created up here. And then we're printing that data object every time we make an addition. And if you notice, every time we print the data object again, it gets bigger. So look here. This list contains one string so far. Then the next time we see the next row of data, it now contains 2 strings because we've added a piece of data. And finally, it's going to contain 4 total strings. So our list of data contains 1, 2, 3, 4 strings, each representing a row in the database table. If I can get this to, I can cheat. Yeah, okay. So this matches, even in fact, the order of data matches here, which isn't necessarily always the case. The order doesn't matter. If you ran this independently and you saw a different order, that's okay. Like, there's not a problem. The order doesn't matter because in our select query, we didn't specify the order in which it should return results. But here we can see like the color matches up, the material matches up, the volume matches up. We're getting each of our rows back from the database and returning each row into a string. So this is a really common task that you need to do in software development or engineering is taking data and reforming it or reshaping it into something that you can use somewhere else or something that you can read somewhere else. So going back to the code, we've kind of added this log line in order to see what we're getting out of our new data object. What we want to do, and I'm just going to look back at the notes here to kind of show where we're at. So to close everything out, what we need to do is actually respond to the request for data. So what we're doing is we're referencing the request, the original request that we got. So notice here that I'm referring to the same request that I referred to up here in this if statement. So I said, if the request that I get has this URL with API data at the end, I'm going to do some stuff. And then at the very end, what I say is, I want to respond to that same request. And I want to respond with the content that we just created. So we just made this content called data. And now we're going to respond with that data that we made. So one of the caveats of using this respond with method is that it expects a string. So it expects just a basic string, unless we do some kind of like extra work. But to keep things simple, we can give it the string that it expects. And remember, a string is just like we made here, right? So string of data. But the problem is we have a list of strings. So we're going to use this kind of fancy method that JavaScript or like TypeScript provides called join. It's a method that we can use for lists of data. So any list of data, you can use this join method, which basically says, hey, I want to take all the items in the list and I want to smush them together and turn them into a string. And this here is saying how they should be joined together. So like when I join them, what do you want me to put between each one? And I think the best way to look at this is really just to show you in the console what this looks like after we do this. So what I'm going to do is actually take it and put it in its own variable. So we'll call it data join. And I'll paste it here. So we're going to take data and join it. And I'll actually get rid of this console statement. And I'll console log it right here. So we'll console log data joined. We'll be able to see what that looks like. And then instead, what I'll respond with in our response, I'll say data joined. So you see what I did there? I basically just took this and I put it inside of an object called data joined. And this is actually of type string, if you want to be specific about it. And then I'm going to log that to show you what it looks like. So since we updated the web server again, we're gonna kill it, Control C, and we're gonna run it again here. So it's checking it to make sure the code is okay, and then it's gonna run the web server. So I'm gonna refresh the page so it makes that request. The request was successful, and we can see here what it printed. So it's still printing It's still printing row by row right here. But it's not printing the content of data anymore. It's just printing the result after we joined it all together. So it's only printing the one time instead of printing every time we change data. And you can see here, all it's printing is just basically one row at a time, joined by this character, which you can't see because it's a special character. This is called a new line character. So the new line character just means, basically go to the next line. If you're viewing the content, like if you're viewing the text content, most content viewers, like this console or a text editor, will perceive new line, like this 2-character string, this backslash and n, as a new line. So basically, if you want to like present some content and have it go to the next line, you can use this special character. But that's how we're getting it to look like, go to the next line for each row. So this is now starting to look like a lot like our database does. It's if you were just using like this editor here. Okay, so we're nearly there. We've nearly reached basically the full picture. And now that our request looks good, our request response looks good, we'll go back to the index.html and just double check our script tag. So this is how we're actually making requests to begin with from that HTML page. So remember, first things first, the HTML itself will load. That's in here. And then next, the HTML, any requests that it makes, we need to handle them here. So if we wanted to add like new requests, we would just make another if statement. And we could do it like right here. We could say like if request event request URL equals URL plus. We could call it something new. We could say API something. Like, it doesn't really matter what it is. And then inside of these braces, handle this request. Okay, and then in index.html, maybe we could add some more code to like make this request too. So we could say another response, and like instead of API data, we'd say API something. So that's just to give you an idea of handling different requests. But we're going to double check this to make sure it looks good. So we have the URL API data that matches this API data string here. So what I'm doing is I'm just literally using the addition symbol and saying, hey, take like this URL and just add the following to it. So we're making the request to the right URL. We're fetching, which we covered in the last session in more detail. And then if we get a response that looks good, we're just going to turn it into text, and then we're logging it actually on our web page. So let's go check it out. I mean, this code has been here. I haven't, I didn't just add this. It actually was here the whole time. So if I reload this page, refresh it, you can see it makes the request to data in the headers. But what we didn't look at before is the response. In the response, you actually see the data that we're reading from the database. So this is the sort of completed picture. So we have a web server. It loads a database. It gives us this file that we can then view as an HTML page. From this HTML page, we can request data from the database, which it then gives back to us. If I were to modify this database file, we could update the data that it gives us. So like, I know we're a little bit over time, but I just kind of want to show this really quick. If I make an insert statement, which you can get really quickly just by using this handy editor, on the right-hand side, it has all these recommended queries. So if you ever forget the syntax for this, you can just copy it from here. So it's wanting us to insert into the table name, and then we need to give the columns that we're going to insert into in parentheses, and then the values that we want to insert. So I'm going to insert a new row. I'm going to specify the color, the material, the volume, and the manufacturer location. And then just really quickly, I'm just going to add some bogus values, like this bottle will be yellow. The material will be class 2. The volume, let's say, is 800 milliliters, and then it was manufactured in the US, let's say. So I'm going to run this. Okay, so the query ran successfully. So now, if I select again quickly from the table, just give me everything in the table, we can see the new row. So it's yellow glass and 800 milliliters. And what I can do is download this database file again. So I'm going to download a new copy with the new data inside. And I'm going to go to my downloads folder. Oops. Let me just go. And we'll just overwrite our existing, database file. So I'm just going to move that over to our database. We're going to put it right here. It's going to ask me to replace it, which I will. And if we stop the server, restart it, we can go back to our page and refresh it. Oh. We should get the new data. Oh no, we're missing some data. Maybe it didn't actually replace it. I'm not sure what happened. Could be that there were, maybe it's cached or something like that. Oh, I hope not. Let's check one more time. I don't see it. That's a shame. Maybe I didn't save it to the right place. Because the data is definitely there. Sometimes this stuff happens though. You do something and yeah, you know what I did? I think this is the old database. Yeah, so if you download something and it's called the same thing, it'll call it this now. So let's try that. I think I just downloaded an old file. So let's make sure I'm saving it to the right place. Whoops. Okay. And I know we're a little bit over time, but let's just do this one more time. So I'm going to this directory again, and I'm just going to paste it in here. Oops. There, put it in there. And get rid of it there. Okay, so now we're certainly sure because it's called something else, hopefully. If this doesn't work, who knows why? But you know, sometimes that happens. Not the end of the world. Okay, so this one's called 2. So I'm gonna update my database title reference here. And maybe I can just copy the name just to be extra sure. Correct. So I'm copying the name. Okay, let's save that. We shouldn't even need to restart the server. Oh, we do actually, because we changed the name of the database. All right, fingers crossed. Yes, it works. Okay. I don't know why it didn't work before,
Yeah, it
but
did.
yeah, I'm really glad that that worked this time. So yeah, you can see it updated the content of the database, and now we get more data this time. So hopefully, I know this was a really long-winded explanation, but hopefully you see the value in this. This guide can kind of show you how just to set up your own website, to set up a database for your own website that you can edit on your own independently, and then have queries hooked up to the web page so that you can actually deliver content to your web page that you created yourself, like from your own database. So if you wanted to extend this project, you could make it so that the HTML updates with the content of the database, or you could add a button to maybe send new data to the database. So there's all kinds of stuff you could do with this, but I think that's it for today's session and this series. So I hope that was useful or informative. Maybe gives you some ideas on what you could do yourself with this kind of info. But yeah, thanks for watching. And
Yeah, thank you so much, Paige. It was like very, very helpful, and I hope a lot of people enjoy it. And if they have more questions, they can reach you at your email or your office hours.
yeah, I know a lot of this material can happen quickly. Sometimes I go into kind of deep detail without meaning to, but you know, the reason I do that is because I hope it's interesting and I hope people want to ask questions. So please, like, don't hesitate ever to ask me questions. I like answering questions and I like helping people out with this kind of stuff. So it's certainly why I enjoy the sessions. So yeah, please don't hesitate to ask questions again. This is my info here. So the office hours link, you can go here.
Mhm.
And then my email is right here. You can answer questions there. And yeah, you can sign up for office hours just using this link. So you can see we got sessions all month, every day this month. So this coming month.
That's great. All right, so we're gonna stay for a little bit, just us. So I'm gonna just close the Facebook and stop the recording. And for everyone watching, thank you so much and have a good night.